Hello and welcome to FinTech Impact. I'm your host, Jason Pereira. Today I show you have Mark Heynen, co-founder of Knapsack. Knapsack is an advisor artificial intelligence platform that started off specifically, like many, in the notation space, but has evolved beyond that specifically into agency and other areas to help enable advisor workflow. And with that, here's my interview with Mark. Mark, thanks for being time today.
Thanks for having me.
So Mark Heynen of Knapsack, tell us about Knapsack.
Yeah, Knapsack, I would think of as an AI overlay that helps you get your work done. It deals with the administrative minutia in the background for financial advisors and does so in a very compliant way. The thing that makes Knapsack unique is that it plugs in with all your data sources. So we plug into your email, your calendar, but then we also have access to 8,000 plus other data sources that you can plug into. The second thing that makes it unique is that it has an agent platform where in natural language, you can design agents and have them running in the background. So that could be anything from small fun things like, hey, check my email and calendar for when I'm going to a conference next and automatically draft emails to people who are based there to ask if they want to catch up, to really important things like it's year-end tax planning season. Let's go ahead and check my cloud drive for who I have documents for tax planning and automatically draft emails to my clients who have not submitted documents and make sure I have those, and then schedule meetings at times I'm available. So
All
these
right.
are all automations that can run in the background using your agent.
So we'll dive into that a little bit more. Talk about the origin story of Knapsack. How did you come to be?
Yeah. So just in terms of my personal background, I'm a serial founder. So this is my fifth company. My last company, PayJoy, is a FinTech, does emerging market lending, co-founded with two
Previous
friends.
guest of the podcast.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And so Doug Gibb and I started that in 2015. They're doing very well, 400 million plus in ARR is what's publicly available. And there I met Cooper, my co-founder, who's one of the first engineers, joined PageWay straight out of Stanford in 2016 and is a fearless engineer. Ultimately, he went off to study in University of London, study statistics and machine learning. And we reconnected because we saw there was this fundamental problem in financial services where people were trying to use AI on sensitive data and they were getting stuck. They were stuck on the compliance side. They were stuck because the quality wasn't quite there. A lot of the generic tools weren't actually providing the quality that they were looking for and the features they were looking for. And so we started building out in that space. We started by providing a fully private note taker, so a desktop note taker that never actually saved any information on our servers. It started with local inference, actually running LMs on device. We were a little early there. I think that will happen ultimately, but the on device compute wasn't there. The LMs were not efficient enough.
Yeah, I
We
mean, you
then
basically have a older laptop. Bottom line is, yeah, you're right. The computer is the threshold, and really, when you don't know what the device is at the other end, you can't really know exactly how well you're going to perform.
Exactly. And we had an interesting situation where our most excited users often had the lowest powered computers, and their computers would start heating up. And they would be really excited about running our software, but be very concerned about the state of their computers. And we realized that's not a sustainable way to go. A lot of people in finance use Windows computers that have 8 megabytes of RAM, right? That's not really going to work. What we did is we,
Lots to be said about that, but continue.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So we pivoted into what we call ephemeral compute, which is basically allowing inference to happen in the cloud, but then throwing away all of the context and throwing away the output immediately. The best way to think about this is you go to the airport, they often scan your ID or they take a photo of you when you check in these days at the airport, especially in the US. And they say there, we'll throw this photo away afterwards. It's the same thing. We're just using the data in the moment, but then throwing it away. That's another way to do private AI and a very compliant way to operate. And so we shifted to basically using ephemeral compute. We also shifted to an online platform. So now you can go to knapsack.ai and start using our system immediately because we didn't have to run on the desktop. Another interesting side point there is we tried to convince some of our desktop users to move to the online tool, even though it had a lot more features. The desktop
I've
users,
heard this story before. Continue.
yeah, the desktop users did not want to switch. They were very, very wedded to the desktop software. I think there are some people who just don't want bots in the meeting and feel very strongly about not having bots in the meeting. I don't know how you feel. I think the Overton window has shifted a little bit where now bots are pretty common in meetings, but there's some people who feel very strongly that their clients feel strongly, or they assume their clients feel strongly. Yeah,
Thank you
actually,
for saying that. They haven't
yes,
surveyed. They assume the same kind of people say my clients are going to use this. I'm like, have you tried?
exactly.
Yeah.
You're obviously involved in Focal, you're deep in this space. What's your take on that question of bots versus desktop?
Let me just simply state that I've been using, seen before I adopted Focal, and I was using generic AI tools out of Zoom or whatever else it was. Actually, before that, I was using, oh God, I think I tried 3 different platforms, Firefly and Fathom and whatever else. And in all that time, so let's call it the 3 years probably since those things became an option, one person requested it be turned off.
Right.
One person. So and I was like, yeah, no problem whatsoever. But at the end of the day, this is what I always tell people about advisor adoption or client adoption of technology. Oh, my old clients are going to use it, these clients are going to use it. I'm like, why is perfection the goal? Why is 100% adoption rate the goal? Because the reality is that even if I get 50, 60, 70, 80%, somewhere, it doesn't matter. The productivity gains from that are just so immense. Who cares? And everybody and all these systems are really good now, basically saying you're being recorded, like they're disclosing it, right? So people are opting in by nature of not opting out. So the
Right.
answer is more often than not, the biggest hurdle is not the client's willingness to accept technology. It's the advisor's own bias against it or their perceived notion of it. So it's they're telling you more about themselves than they are about their client base.
And what do you say to the objection that the clients are self-censoring if the recording's on? They may not opt out of it, but they're not giving you
Do
the
we
recording.
really? Have we not seen that? First off, you should just assume that every conversation is recorded. That's just a healthy thing in this day and age, quite honestly. And I know
Right.
of certain high-level executives who've lost their job for forgetting that they were being recorded. But the
Right.
point is that are they self-censoring? Maybe. I've had those who basically said at a certain point, can we turn this off?
Right.
Fine. Right. I've had a couple of occasions where conversation got sensitive about something and they wanted to be off the record. They have that option, not a problem. Are they self-censoring? I don't think anyone can answer that question. That's the
Right.
reality. Hawthorne experiments prove that effectively just the nature of observation, the fact observation exists changes the outcome or the behavior pattern. So I'm sure there is something happening there, maybe at least early, but I think it's become so ubiquitous that I don't think people are necessarily self-censoring.
This isn't being recorded, is
It'd be a really weird podcast if I wasn't recording it.
it? I think maybe we saw the same thing that you're seeing, that there was like more of a revealed preference versus assumed preference, where the revealed preferences people are actually totally fine with
Yeah.
recordings. And in fact, they like the accountability that it brings in this space.
And I'll give you another concept, like where basically simple experiment from my personal experience is that, and that was in my own biases, when we started offering bookings through Calendly and we offered remote meeting through Zoom or whatever else it was at the time, I presumed that only the younger clients would take me up on it. Within the first 3 months, 60% of my meetings were remote and it was all across the spectrum. I had 80-year-olds booking remote meetings.
Yeah. So revealed preference, right? People are
Exactly.
more than happy to learn about the technology if it makes it easier for them. And so I think the other dynamic we noticed is, and I think John from Focal uses the term swivel chair issue. I think that's very real. I think that's a good turn of phrase. Ultimately, I think it actually goes beyond wealth tech. I think a lot of people have their 37 tabs open. People would prefer it if they could live in 5 tabs. And
I
the
feel
question
attacked.
is,
Continue.
sorry,
I feel attacked.
I think ultimately we are entering peak SaaS, right? We're in this, what I would call Hunger Games of SaaS. It's a thesis I've been developing where you can now connect many, many tools into one tool. And the question then is, which tools are going to survive? Which are going to end up being one of those last 5 tabs, and which are just going to operate in the background via model context protocol or other protocols. And with LMs, you can actually execute actions on other tools from another interface. I think we just saw the Denali interface launch at the conference you and I were at Advise AI.
Yep.
And clearly that's the direction they're looking at. They're simplifying the interface and having one window, one single pane of glass into everything. There's also the Chrome extension model. I think you were demoing that at the show. So there are a lot of different approaches to fundamentally the same problem, which is that people don't want to go back and forth to so many different tools. And yeah, this is really the open question. And I think this is going to be the biggest platform shift that's going to happen. It's probably the biggest downstream effect of LLMs getting better and better and getting connected to your data. This is what we thought really deeply about as we were rolling this out to advisors. And we realized that the real value is in actually having natural language agents running over all of your data. We want to be agnostic of which note taker you use as an advisor. Use Jump, use Focal, use Fireflies, use us. It really doesn't matter. Ultimately, the data usually gets saved into the CRM. So the CRM connection is probably the most important. And ultimately, what you really want to do is have your tasks that are really weighing you down automated as much as possible with you in the loop. And that's really the art here, is to actually enable really great automation with agents running in the background, but make sure the advisor still feels in the loop. And so just a great dumb example is our email autopilot, which you wake up in the morning and every email that requires a response has a response pre-drafted with your full context. We do not send emails. That's intentional because you need to be reviewing those and putting tweaks on it and feel you're in control.
You're figuring out when the human should be in the loop.
Exactly. And that, I think, is where most of the value is going to be created, is in designing those natural language agents. And so we have naps. These are natural language agents. We have a nap store where you can see other people's agents. We had a number of the people at the Advise AI conference start creating agents in real time, which was really great to see.
Very cool.
And so ultimately, I think that's where a lot of the value will be created and where people will use Knapsack. And then I don't know if Knapsack will be one of those 5 tabs. It could actually be that the CRMs will basically end up surviving in that and actually have embedded note takers, embedded tools. It could be that Denali ends up one of those things. And to enable that, we actually created this other product, which is basically a headless version of Knapsack where, for those that don't know what headless means, it really just means developers can integrate Knapsack into their websites. And so if you are a FinTech app developer, if you're a custodian, if you're a CRM, if you're any kind of wealth tech application and you want to integrate agents into your application that are completely knowledgeable of the user in terms of their email calendar, their notes, if you want to embed a note taker, you can basically sign up for Knapsack and embed it and have your users use it in the background under your branding. And so I think that means any of those apps will, in this Hunger Games, have another arrow in their quiver in terms of making sure they can retain their users and have deeper relationships with them.
I'll commend you because you're talking in a way that I think is smarter than some of the other AI players out there. And we saw it at Advise. I'm not going to name names or shame anyone, but I think very quickly people are sobering up to the fact that the utility functions of AI are not products, they're functions. Like the needing dictation is a commoditized function already. I think a lot of these companies are aware that sooner or later, no one wants to log into 40 things that they can log into, right? So
Exactly.
how do you limit the attack vector? And I mean, there's a certain amount of, a lot of industries or a lot of software, you'll settle for good enough. Microsoft built an entire empire on good enough. Right. Again, I can make jokes about Teams, but I can even use an example about bookings, right? Like there's no way any of those software standing alone are better than a very vertical specific deep player, but it's the default because it's easy, right? So does someone like an
And it's
Orion
compliant. I think that's actually really
and
important. No one's
compliant
going to get fired
usually?
for adopting it. And people don't want to
Well,
put their job at risk by adopting a new tool that has a data security.
yeah, the old saying is no one gets fired for hiring Microsoft. My response is sometimes they should. But the reality is that, and then you already have, so a lot of people came out with commoditized functions or things that would be easily commoditized based on the function or the use of the AI. And thinking that was the product. And in actuality, that was easily copied. You have the likes of Wellbox basically launching their own AI note taker. You better believe like CI's, or sorry, Salesforce has launched its own agent system. Like these companies are just like, oh, you took that off the shelf model and created this function. Guess what? We can do the same thing. And that way you can't get ahead of us or depose our role in the space because frankly, you're collecting this data and you become dangerous to us. So it was foolish to think the likes of the CRM companies and the all-in-one platforms and everybody else wasn't going to fight back. They absolutely were going to fight back. And what you saw with Orion and Denali, hey, like great first out of the gate, like a great first attempt at making a chatbot. I'm not bullish on chatbots being the interface. We've been here before. It's too much cognitive burden, but they're at least now in a position where that's a function that they can build off of because they got all the architecture. They can start figuring out ways to get the jobs to be done. So I think that like you went through an evolution faster than I'm seeing other people go through where you're realizing no, it's not really us being the client-facing thing that is the thing that matters. What you are worrying about is you're building a jobs to be done engine,
Mm-hmm.
right? Agentic workflow and the ability for advisors to, it's one thing for workflow to exist off the shelf in a CRM or whatever else it is, but no two businesses are alike. So either a business has to modify their business to basically fit that exactly, which a lot of times it doesn't happen, or you have to customize, and customization can be costly or sometimes not even viable or possible or has to be cobbled together using Zapier and various other tools. By basically creating a jobs to be done engine that can tie into these things and again make it headless, so I don't even, maybe the tech person or the guy who handles this in the office handles this, but I'm not leaving Salesforce, I'm not leaving the experience in this tool, I'm not leaving the experience in that tool, and but the job gets done. People don't care how it gets done, they just care it gets done.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. The way I think about it is the large hyperscalers are building task completion engines. So whether it's Gemini, Copilot, ChatGPT, what have you, Anthropic, they're building engines that not only have awareness of your data, but they're actually executing tasks and getting things done, whether it's generating documents or drafting emails or even going into interfaces and actually clicking around and booking flights or whatever. ChatGPT is doing that. I then see a lot of the smaller players, more vertical players, building just very vertical discovery engines. I think the note takers were vertical discovery engines. Like, I'm going to take the notes for you and I'm going to tell you the three things that you need to log into your CRM, right? That's not getting any work done. It's just discovering the work that needs to be done.
The work that was done was me actually manually doing that,
Yeah.
as opposed to the actual, you're right, it's a capture of the trigger.
It's a data transformation work that it's doing
Yes.
automatically, but it's not actually getting the core work done that is unique to a financial advisor. I think these larger horizontal players are moving very fast in this direction. And I think in this Hunger Games of SaaS, anyone who's not moving fast and not adding this feature in is going to get left behind, because it's going to be really hard to defend using a CRM that doesn't have natural language interfaces and an agent platform on the back end. I think people are going to expect CRMs to update automatically without having to manually update the CRMs. That's just an expectation that's going to exist shortly.
At least put a human in the loop, validate first, but yes, I agree.
Yeah, with validation, but actually typing first name and last name into a CRM, I think people are going to think that's the equivalent of using the yellow pages, right? It's just bonkers. And then I think people are also going to expect best next action engines to be built into CRMs. People are going to expect the ability to run agents across their data within CRMs. And so with that expectation, I don't know how people are going to keep pace, right? Because some of this stuff requires a significant amount of engineering work. And we heard from Denali that this was a really significant effort, just getting the data into the vector database.
No, it was a big lift.
My understanding is they carved off a whole bunch of people who used to work with Reed at Black Diamond, camped them out in Florida, and basically kept them immune from whatever else would be going on.
They had the Skunkworks the project, but
Skunkworks.
yeah, that was while fixing a larger data architecture issue altogether. It was a lift.
Exactly. So I don't see a lot of other companies having the resources for that, a lot of other SaaS companies having the resources for that. So they really want a turnkey solution. They really want a Stripe style API that gets this done. And that's really where we see things going, is a lot of these companies embedding this, and then we'll see which agents end up being the most powerful.
Yeah, these people are, there's something so powerful to being in the room when the conversation happens, right? Because that's the origin of all work. There's work we do behind the scenes for clients, but the origin of all client work pretty much starts with the conversation with the client. All the expectations, what's going to happen, all starts there. And there's something so powerful about being in that room, threatening to every company that comes after that that has to touch it. So you look at what you said about the future of CRMs and everything else, you better believe they had to move, because if not, it was going to be a mortal threat. If they just sat back and said, we're not going to touch any of that, we're just going to let people continue, we're going to let all these companies populate us. Sooner or later, the company's like, well, we have all this data. What do we need you for?
They're downstream of where all the action's happening.
Exactly. So that's been enormously powerful there. And then the other piece of this is that they got into all of that, but you're right. Like the fact that they have all this now, to me, it's not about the natural language processing. Like I said, the NLP is a function, and now it becomes how are you going to enrich the experience of the technology that you had pre-existing to reinvent the experience, to make it less painful, more productive, and frankly, yeah, prettier, better experience. But in the day, we're all buying software to solve a problem. Great. You now have another better, faster way of potentially solving that problem, which is again where your agency conversation comes in.
I think it's important to think about what's happening with artificial intelligence as not the equivalent of the internet, but more the equivalent of a new type of computer coming out. Famously, Turing initially thought computers should be probabilistic, and there were other people who said they wanted to build cash registers, deterministic computers, and Turing lost that debate back in the 40s and 50s. And so we basically got to the point now where we have CPUs very deterministic, great at crunching numbers, but we just now were able to reintroduce this idea of a probabilistic computer that can actually generate new content. And I think this is one reason why it's hard for us to wrap our minds around it, because it's actually a whole different way of working. And I think this is going to have really far reaching effects for people. I think people are talking a lot about best next action frameworks and
Yeah.
having suggestions of best next action. I think what people are probably underestimating is how successful these agents can be in actually executing those actions. So not only suggesting what to work on, but actually getting that work done. I think that's going to be really, really powerful. There is actually one agent we built called the Vibe Tasker, which literally
Hmm.
answers the question of, based on what's been going on and based on what I have going on today, what should I work on right now? And actually help me get that thing done, right? And you basically, it's a push experience. To your point about the chat box, you're not actually typing in questions. You're just initiating that, and it basically looks at everything and says, here's the one thing you should do. Send this email. This person's been waiting on it. You have 30 minutes before your next meeting. Here's the email drafted in your inbox. Here are two things you should check before you send the email. It's extremely powerful. And I think it's just a completely different way of working.
It's funny because you're basically saying you built something to solve the time, not next best action. You're basically describing there what is effectively a time management tool, right? So how do I best use my, yes, next best action is solving the problem of where do I actually focus in that regard? Because traditionally next best action is simply what's the next thing I do for the client? What's based on what's done? And that's always been, again, very deterministic, very linear based on the systems we had before. But now that's interesting. You built almost like, I would argue that it exists outside of client context, right? How I even run my business is a consideration for what my next best action is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And having a thought partner, like having something that is extremely intelligent and knows all your information is really important there. I'm actually curious, like what agents do you use on a daily basis outside of the note taker?
I haven't used enough. I haven't gotten into agency deep enough yet. There are a number one that are programmed that I used already. So the Shaping Wealth one, Lydia, I've used that in complex prepping for complex client cases in the past, specifically on an emotional level. I programmed a couple of agents within ChatGPT to just run like base level checks, tickets available for something great. I can now have that task repeating every Monday or every day until it gets done and then notifies me of that. Great, thanks. I recently did one where it was a classic. I have this report that I compile once a month from 6 different sources. There's some data scrubbing, there's some data parsing and scrubbing needs to happen, and then populating the report and updating a spreadsheet and then sending out an email. And it's not a big, heavy task, but I finally just this month, beginning of the month, I'm like, okay, let's just fix this. And putting in some intelligence around human loop prompting around there's a new entry for this type of holding. We don't know what it is. Let's validate it. This is what we believe it is. Let's go from there. That took almost as long as it would have taken to do the thing natively.
Okay.
And now it's like, great. I just got to drop the source documents in and it's done.
And do you find you're using wealth tech specific tools to do that, or are you using the horizontal sort of AI tools to do
I'm
that?
using the horizontal AI tools at this point and the wealth tech specific because I don't know that they're reaching enough, quite honestly, at this point. So one of the things, and again, I'm different. I'm very much just right now trying to figure out where I'm going to stand up a company-wide LLM where I can just dump everything securely and not have to worry about that. Again, going back to the security issue, forget about everything else. Let me dump it all in and then I'll work from that because then I can make those workflows specific and they'll tie into my other softwares, CRMs, whatever else it is. But that's a level beyond most people are going to do, right? Itemize things that I know I will do or want to do.
Mm,
And but if it touches client data, I can't possibly use some of the vertical, some of the other stuff. If this was non-PII related information that was being parsed, great, no problem. It's when you start getting into the PII stuff that's just, okay, I want to accomplish this, but for what I need to do this to do securely, I've got to cross this bridge first, which is a bigger lift. And once I do that, I can then enable.
yeah. To what extent do you think model context protocol gets rid of that sort of requirement to dump data into a model or into a provider?
I was already specifically, my entire thinking was that it would literally just tie into the MCPs that exist for a
Okay.
lot of these companies. So I wouldn't have to aggregate it all in one place.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think we ran across a lot of those concerns when we were rolling out Knapsack. We actually had to go a step further. So obviously with MCP, with Model Context Protocol, for the listeners who maybe are not aware, this means you don't have to upload your data into sort of a corpus and have someone else host your data.
Yeah.
It actually is a protocol where you can actually have
Well,
the AI go out and search your data sources and then throw away that context afterwards. So that's
yeah.
actually
So
important. So it's
the way
never.
I explain it is that we've had APIs for a while, which is like a rule book on this is how you talk to the software. Like you tell it to do things, you tell it to find things, you tell it to basically, to read it, to run calculations, whatever else. Here's the rule book on how you use my software if you're another software. Thank you. And
Mm,
so if you want to connect two softwares, you always had the problem of, okay, now you need a little piece in the middle that basically says if this, then that, and directs traffic, right? And what MCPs do is they sit over top of it, that API, with their
mm,
own APIs that are standardized across the board. But now they've introduced an AI layer that basically runs that API for you. So
right.
it narrowed the number of commands to be sent in to accomplish something, and
Mm,
it allows API, basically allows two different AIs to talk to each other and figure out how to get something done based on context, which is incredible.
yeah. And so what it means is you can hook up these MCPs to your primary data sources. We can basically hook up the LM to your data sources, hook up Knapsack, for example, by MCP to your data sources, and then have it go across them without worrying about Knapsack actually retaining any of that information or having access on a regular basis to that information. I think that's a really important point from a compliance point of view. I get the sense that's not widely understood, considering at Advise AI, people were really, really concerned about who's hosting what. We went a step further and said we'll automatically delete all your chat history every 30 days. So we're actually not only are we not retaining your emails, calendar, docs, any of that context, we're also deleting all records of what's happening every 30 days, unless you opt out, obviously. A lot of people are saving to the CRM.
Yeah, but that makes sense because why would we want the data sitting on another person's server creating another attack vector? So well done.
Yeah, that's the idea. I do think there's something interesting in talking to people at Advise AI. I think people are very, very concerned about AI startups training LMs on their client data. I feel like there might be a misunderstanding that none of these AI startups are able to train any LLMs. That's an extremely capital intensive undertaking that really only the labs do. And most of the agreements with the labs, whether it's OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever, include the fact that no training happens based on the data. So I feel like there's something in the water where people are just very concerned about this.
Look, I think it's one of these things like when I presented on technology in the past and I show all this technology what happened, I inevitably get someone put their hand and say, what about security? I'm like, what about security? Like the reality is that it's what they're admitting to is fear, right? They've heard this thing that they don't understand.
Right.
Canada's infamous for this because everybody believes that there's this myth that all Canadian data needs to be stored on Canadian servers. It doesn't exist. In fact, ask an it's a myth that just won't die. In fact, the legislation everybody thinks points to it actually says we has a page dedicated to it. Says we don't tell you not to do this. Here's the rules by which you do it. And again, I've literally had to correct people on stage at regulatory committees that basically say that's not real. So it's this thing that everybody knows that is wrong. So you have that, right? And then my classic is always, well, let me ask you something. How many of your passwords are password 123? Or do you have any passwords on a note tag on your place? So if you look at most hacks, and the reality is most security breaches are human engineering, not technical engineering. Because if you're a company and you start to gain, especially if you start to gain scale, you got to take that stuff seriously. So you put in place stuff to take it seriously. And so there's that. Now, I get with this entire, that's people admitting they're hearing about this and thinking about like, oh my God, my client's data is being used in a way that they don't approve of, or could be extracted later, or could be used against me. Who knows what else, whatever fear is unrooted because they can't even think of what's logical in this. They're admitting to fear of their ignorance of what's happening there. But you're right in terms of training. I think there's also a misunderstanding of what training means. Because what
Mm-hmm.
they're really saying, I think what they're really fearful is I don't want my client data being part of the corpus of data that this LLM has access to.
This is the
So I don't want my stuff. It's not that it's training. It's like there's a difference between having that book in the library, right?
mm-hmm.
And being the book that it learned to read off of. It's not the same thing. So I think that people aren't getting that, but what they're really saying is that I don't want my stuff to basically be somewhere I can't control.
Yeah, and I think a big piece of this was that ChatGPT launched with a free tier where they did train on the data, and that was people's first experience with AI. And so I think that lodges in people's heads that they just assume that's just generally the way other people operate.
Google's definitely taught us not to trust them. At the end of the day, the reality is that there's an entire industry based off of the monetization of other people's data.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting at the conference. I guess I was also curious, what do you make of the people who are just getting into note takers? I find it interesting that there's this dichotomy between people in some circles thinking note takers are everywhere, it's just a given, it's commoditized. And then the fact of the matter is that 18% of advisors are using note takers. So the vast majority are not yet using note takers. So it seems like there's a lot of people just sitting on the sidelines. And I'm wondering what you attribute that to. Is it the regulatory risk? Is it the stuff we were talking about before? Like,
No, this is a normal adoption curve type thing. Show me a technology that, like, I mean, like, okay, advisor specific CRM, like note takers, not even 2 years old, maybe a little bit
well,
over.
but note takers have been around for 5 years, 6 years, right?
Is
Like
it that long now? So I'm thinking, and I
Fireflies
saw,
has been around for a while.
okay, so specifically LLM based stuff. So when did the ChatGPT drop initially? It was 3 years ago, 4 years ago?
I think Otter was using GPT-2 and other things, right?
Yes,
So
that was,
quality difference.
look, if you were using Otter and stuff like that, you were like out here in the like frontier, right? I was using
Right.
frontier tech, but then all of the advisor-specific note takers really took off after LLMs became a thing. What software gets 18% penetration in 2.5 years? Now, mind you, a little bit easier because you can get it default from whatever conference software you're using, teleconference software you're using
Right.
as a default. So, but what other software gets to almost 20% in 2.5 years? So this is the adoption curve in itself, right? And every new technology, even if it's like, there's always a reason not to use it, right? And there's sometimes logical, technical reasons for it. And there's sometimes security reasons for it. But the big reason is behavior, right? And again, it's this entire, especially when you enter something into as intimate as the relationship between a client and advisor and have that thing in the room. I get that. And not, and like also, let's not discount the fact that we're the ones attending the conferences. We're talking to the people who know. I was at drinks with an advisor the other day, and I was like, dude, have you started using note takers yet? And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, oh my God. Just sign up, it'll change your life. And the number of, I think we take for granted that there is a long tail of people who are probably never even heard, probably heard these names, but don't really know what the heck they do. And that's going to be a while.
Yeah. And I think people always underestimate, what happens in 5 years, but they think things will happen in 1 year. That classic Bill Gates quote.
And it does happen. My entire article on kitsis.com was basically around that. It's the next 2 years, don't expect much. 10 years, your business look completely different.
I think that's a really important point. And I guess the other thing that we're thinking about is what's going to happen with email going forwards. Email is this default protocol that is we're wedded to effectively, right, at this point.
Oh, it's so
But
Lindy, we're screwed.
you're 100%. I think ultimately people have to use it, people hate it, and there has to be a better way. And I actually think that's a really wide open area at this point for people to find something better. Figuring out a way to do that authentically, where you're not actually being inauthentic to the people you're emailing with, is probably going to be the really interesting to figure out. But yeah, I feel that that's just wide open at this point.
Look, this problem has been solved in other jurisdictions. Unfortunately, it takes totalitarian dictatorships to make it happen, right? WeChat solved this problem a long time ago. The majority of comms happen over WeChat. You can even renew your driver's license over it, whatever the heck else it is. But that's in a place that was largely competition was somewhat limited by government and supported. So the reality is you're not going to get the same. For years, people have been trying to be the one chat tool to rule them all in North America and elsewhere in the world, and it's just never happened.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah, I think the question I asked you before about what agents do you actually use, you obviously have been thinking about it a lot. You've been experimenting. I really enjoyed your talk at the conference about the,
Yeah, hey, my podcast with you on going the other way is coming up later. We're supposed to be talking about you. So let's go back to you. We'll go back
sure.
to this stuff later. So I think this has been an informative conversation regardless. So I'm happy to have it. So this is where we are. You launched the headless piece. You're basically becoming effectively a backend protocol or tool for managing workflows that is agnostic from anyone's software. And I think that there's absolutely a place there because you can be really good at creating that interface. There's what's it called? Zapier and Make.com have been very sticky for a lot of companies. So you're in a lot of ways a better version of that specific to this industry, but AI first and native. So where do you see yourself going from this point?
Yeah, we see a lot of potential in providing the infrastructure to enable agents within finance and regulated industries. We see a lot of situations where there's last mile functionality that is really important. We've been talking to a lot of the people on the Kitsis map, the tool providers, who are struggling to integrate AI. We've now seen some announcements. I guess Denali is one example with an AI assistant embedded. We've seen Advisor 360 recently announce that they created an AI assistant that's embedded. I believe we just had an announcement from Precise FP that they are basically embedding more AI. So we're seeing
Everybody's going to
people
bet it. You have to.
there's seeing people launch this stuff, but we're also seeing people are struggling to do it effectively because of the compliance concerns. And one of the challenges people are running into is they need observability. They need to understand how the AI system got the answer it got so they can actually go back to their clients and say, we have the full trace of what happened. That is important for the clients to submit to their compliance officers. It's also important from a sales process point of view. People want to know how things happen. So one thing we did that's unique is we actually have a full observability dashboard where you can see how the LM got the answer it got in terms of what data it used, what data was pulled in. And that's actually quite unique and hard to build and something that our clients are very excited about. I think the way where we see ourselves in 3 or 5 years is I think a fair number of people are going to be using Knapsack as a front end, but I actually think we're going to be core infrastructure that is orchestrating agents on the back end for much of finance. I think it's going to, and there could be other verticals where this level of observability is really important. And I think having a very robust ecosystem of naps or agents that people can just plug into right away, and knowing that they're safe, knowing that they're used, and people don't have to recreate the wheel, that's going to be really important. It's interesting. We're talking about adoption curves a little bit. AI adoption obviously is unprecedented, and ChatGPT adoption is unprecedented. But one interesting thing about that adoption curve is in most other new technologies or new platforms, you use it and then you can immediately recommend other people use it the exact same way, right? Whether it's a social network or Google search, you could just say, do this, and you'll get the same experience I have. With AI or ChatGPT, you write a prompt and you keep on going, and there's no real other way someone else can actually copy that prompt without you going through a lot of friction. So there's no real prompt sharing going on. And so it's actually quite remarkable that AI has grown so quickly without people sharing their best practices. People have to go through 15 versions of a prompt to finally get what they want, and there's no sharing. So I find that really interesting that it's happening even without that capability. I think our natural language agents really enable that prompt sharing, which is really good.
Excellent. Good. So before we wrap up, there's 3 questions I ask everybody in a positive note. The first question is, if you had one wish for something to change in your company or the industry as a whole, what would it be?
I think I would prefer financial advisors are more willing just to try a tool on the free tier after checking through some basic checks of whether someone's talked to, et cetera. And instead of coming up with different rubrics in their head, is this company hasn't been in business for 2 years? We have, but I think it's a little bit anti-innovation. I think people should be willing to try tools, especially on a free tier, establish very quickly if it works for them, and if it not, move on. I feel like that's a way we're going to be able to embrace innovation within the wealth tech sector.
All right. You're basically just wishing people were better with change. Good luck on that one, by the way. So, second question I have for you is basically what's been the hardest part of getting the company where it is today?
I think the hardest thing in any new company, and this is my 5th time around, is always establishing that product market fit and being really honest about what need you're really solving. What is the core problem you're solving? And to make sure it's a real problem, not an imagined problem, and make sure that you're digging in and resetting your expectations on a regular basis. And fortunately, we've gotten to a good spot there, but it is a journey for every new company.
All right. And it's especially in this space, right? Because things are moving so fast and things are changing so rapidly. Last question. What is it that you're working on that keeps you getting up in the morning to keep on fighting the good fight of being an entrepreneur?
I think it's seeing the impact of the products on the customers, seeing people not only save time, which has been the promise of AI for a while, but also be a lot more effective in their jobs. I think seeing the change in people's mental health on that side, seeing them feel like they basically have everything together for all their meetings and staying on top of things, I think that's really exciting.
Excellent. I wish you all the best of luck. I feel like you have pivoted smartly more than other companies I've seen in this space. I don't see them moving fast enough, for my opinion. You are recognizing the shifts in the market faster than others, and you've been really quick to find other value propositions and move away from previous mistakes, like every startup should, but not all of them do. So I commend you on it. I commend your thinking.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Good. So that was my interview with Mark Heynen of Knapsack. If you are in the market for, first of all, if you're a financial advisor and you know you need to do something, this is a good place to start, quite honestly, because frankly, everybody wants to get work done faster. So take a look. As always, if you enjoyed this podcast, please review on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, or your podcasts. Take care.
This podcast was brought to you by Woodgate Financial, an award-winning financial planning firm catering to high net worth individuals and their families. To learn more, go to woodgate.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play, or find more episodes at jasonpereira.ca.